Part 1. The morning I discovered 63 luxury homes worth $28 million sitting on property I'd inherited from my father, I knew Barbara Henderson had made the biggest mistake of her calculating life. She thought she'd orchestrated the perfect land grab while I was out of state, caring for my sick brother. What she didn't realize was that my father's 1928 mining rights contract meant every brick, every shingle, every decorative mailbox automatically became mine the second they broke ground. That woman had the nerve to serve me with trespassing charges, claiming I was harassing innocent homeowners with my surveying tools. She painted me as a dangerous lunatic threatening families and children. But soon she'd discover why you never steal from a cartographer who's been documenting property fraud for 35 years, especially when century-old federal law stands behind you. Before I continue, imagine finding an entire gated community where your apple orchard used to flourish. What would you do if someone constructed 63 mansions on your land without asking? Share your thoughts below and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Malcolm Sterling. Friends, call me Mac. At 64 years old, I've spent 35 years as a professional cartographer and land surveyor throughout Northern California. My father left me 612 acres of pristine valley land back in '97, along with wisdom that shaped my entire career. "Son," he'd say, "never trust anyone who claims to know boundaries without walking every inch of the property themselves." Dawn in Redwood Valley carries the sharp scent of pine mixed with morning fog rolling off the mountains. That's progress creeping into wine country, I suppose. Every sunrise, I'd inspect my property lines with strong black coffee, boots crunching through pine needles while checking for winter storm damage. The crisp mountain air and earthy aroma of Douglas fir reminded me this was genuine agricultural land, not some suburban fantasy overtaking California's countryside. My late wife Elena used to joke that I maintained property documents with the same obsessive care other men devoted to vintage car collections. When she passed 7 years ago, our 3 children scattered across the country chasing careers in Boston, Denver, and Seattle. Can't fault them for seeking bigger opportunities than watching vineyards grow. But it left me alone in a 1948 farmhouse with nothing but memories and my heritage apple trees. Then Barbara Henderson appeared. "Please, call me Barb," she'd insist, wielding her tablet like a weapon of mass destruction and speaking in corporate double-talk that could make Mother Teresa lose her patience. At 54, she'd perfected the suburban HOA president aesthetic: salon-fresh auburn highlights, pristine white Mercedes SUV, waxed monthly, and the soulless smile of someone who'd filed complaints against neighbors for having incorrect house number fonts. Barbara's married to Richard Henderson, our county supervisor, which in Willowbrook Springs means she thinks she's untouchable royalty. For 9 years, she'd been circling my land like a vulture studying roadkill, sending representatives with insulting purchase offers for my supposedly unused valley property. The desperation smelled stronger than her designer perfume every time she appeared uninvited with another incredibly generous opportunity. Real trouble began when I returned from a month-long trip helping my son Daniel through his wife's complicated surgery in Colorado. I'd been looking forward to my quiet routine: coffee at dawn, tending apple trees, maybe repairing irrigation lines if I felt energetic. You know, the kind of peaceful retirement that doesn't involve conference calls or subdivision drama. But approaching my gravel driveway, something felt fundamentally wrong. Instead of bird songs and wind through apple trees, I heard the suburban orchestra of leaf blowers humming and dogs barking. Sounds that had absolutely no business existing on my back 60 acres. I grabbed my surveying equipment and GPS unit, heading toward the commotion, thinking maybe some teenagers were partying or a family's RV had broken down near my property boundary. Walking through what should have been my orchard, the air carried unfamiliar scents: fresh concrete and pressure-treated lumber instead of apple blossoms and wildflowers. What I discovered made my coffee thermos slip from my fingers and shatter against granite. 63 pristine houses spread across my valley like an architectural infection. Professional landscaping where my heritage apple trees used to stand. An ornate stone entrance announcing Sunrise Ridge Estates in calligraphy fancier than museum placards. Families watering flower beds. Children riding bicycles unpaved cul-de-sac, labradoodles fetching frisbees. The entire suburban dream package, constructed on every acre of my valley property. I stood there stunned like a tourist, wondering if I'd somehow driven to the wrong county. But there stood my father's ancient barn, with Elena's garden markers still visible. There was a whispering creek where I'd taught my kids to swim. This was definitely my property, but someone had transformed it into suburbia without bothering to seek permission. That's when Barbara materialized in an electric golf cart, wearing an official HOA president badge, gliding toward me like she owned everything, which, based on her confident expression, she absolutely believed she did. "Excuse me, sir," she announced in that artificially sweet tone that instantly made my jaw tighten. "This is restricted property. Sunrise Ridge is an exclusive community for residents and approved visitors only." I looked around at my trees, my creek, the land where my father taught me to respect property boundaries, and realized I was about to receive an education in small-town corruption. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice measured despite wanting to explode, "I believe there's been some significant misunderstanding. This is my property. Has been since 1997. Barbara's laugh sounded like nails scraping chalkboard. "Oh, sweetie, I'm afraid you're mistaken. The Sunrise Ridge development was purchased legitimately from Northern Valley Development Corporation 3 years ago." She produced a binder thick enough to stop bullets, flipping through documents with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real opposition. "See, right here? 612 acres purchased for appropriate market value. I'm certain this is simply a surveying mistake on your part." The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike dangerously, but 35 years managing boundary disputes taught me to document everything meticulously and remain calm when someone's attempting highway robbery. "Mind if I examine those documents? I'm not legally obligated to share a confidential HOA business with trespassers," she sniffed, clutching that binder like it contained state secrets. "But I'll tell you what, I'm feeling charitable today. These families have children starting school in 3 weeks. Surely we can reach some accommodation that doesn't disrupt their lives." That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was fraud, wrapped in suburban respectability. 5 days later, Deputy Thomas Henderson knocked on my door with papers and a smirk that communicated everything about receiving fair treatment in this county. The restraining order alleged I'd trespassed on Sunrise Ridge property and threatened residents with surveying equipment in a dangerous manner, apparently carrying a GPS unit now qualified as weapon possession. The order banned me from accessing my own back 60 acres, and Thomas made sure to emphasize that violations meant immediate incarceration. Barbara wasn't finished demonstrating her suburban warfare capabilities. Within 10 days, every Sunrise Ridge resident received a letter about the unstable former property owner who presented a potential security risk to families and children. She organized a neighborhood watch committee that monitored my property boundary with the dedication of military sentries, photographing me feeding my own chickens like I was operating a criminal enterprise. The social media campaign came next. Barbara posted comparison photos on the Willowbrook Springs community group, my weathered farmhouse versus the immaculate subdivision, claiming my neglected property was attracting rodents and depressing property values. The comment section erupted into digital combat between locals who knew my family history and newcomers who accepted Barbara's performance completely. But here's where 35 years of surveying expertise pays significant dividends. While Barbara was busy performing victim online, I drove to the county clerk's office and started pulling documentation. The recording fee for that alleged property transfer caught my attention immediately. $75 measly. During my early surveying days, I learned that California requires substantial property transfers to include notarized declarations with multiple witnesses and recording fees matching transaction magnitude. This smelled fishier than 3-day-old salmon. The real smoking gun was the notary certification. Margaret Blackwell had handled real estate transactions for 4 decades, wonderful elderly woman who volunteered at the local library every Thursday. Problem was, Margaret died 8 months before she supposedly notarized my property transfer. Unless she was executing documents from beyond the grave, somebody had forged her official stamp. I contacted my old surveying mentor, Theodore Bull Patterson, who'd forgotten more about property law than most attorneys ever learned. Bull spent 3 days with his advanced GPS equipment traversing every foot of my boundaries, chewing tobacco and muttering about amateur-hour fraud operations. "Mac," he finally concluded, "your property lines are accurate within 4 inches. That entire subdivision is squatting on your land like termites on rotted wood." While I was building my case, Barbara escalated to psychological warfare tactics. Phoenix Security Services started patrolling Sunrise Ridge in marked vehicles with radio communications like my chickens, posed a homeland security threat. Then came the state licensing board complaint alleging I was mentally deteriorating and dangerous to public welfare. Her evidence insisting on accessing my own property. The county contributed by threatening to condemn my farmhouse as a public hazard. Apparently, 75 years of honest weathering made my home an eyesore compared to the cookie-cutter mansions squatting on my valley. That evening, inspecting my fence line in fading twilight, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Motion-activated cameras hidden in my pine trees, with cables snaking back toward Sunrise Ridge. The acrid smell of electrical connections and fresh cable ties told the story. They'd been illegally tapping into my electrical meter to power surveillance equipment. Years ago, I'd helped a neighbor catch copper thieves using electromagnetic field detection equipment, and the same technique revealed months of unauthorized monitoring. I sat in Elena's rose garden as crickets chirped, and the fragrance of her climbing jasmine filled the evening air, contemplating whether I should simply accept whatever money Barbara offered and retire somewhere peaceful. Then I remembered my father's words after the timber company tried stealing our mineral rights back in '80. "Son, when someone tries stealing your land, they're not just taking dirt and trees, they're stealing your family's heritage and future." Elena had written in her journal that night, "Mac never surrenders when protecting what's righteous." Time to honor that legacy. 3 weeks later, Barbara deployed her media strategy. Channel 5 News arrived at Sunrise Ridge like they were covering a presidential scandal, complete with satellite equipment and enough camera gear to film a Hollywood production. The story, "Elderly Man's Confusion Threatens Young Families." They interviewed concerned parents holding designer babies, portrayed me as a confused hermit stuck in the past, and gave Barbara 7 uninterrupted minutes to deliver her Academy Award-worthy victim performance. "We simply want to live peacefully," she sobbed, dabbing eyes with tissues that appeared suspiciously dry. "It breaks my heart watching someone so confused, but we cannot allow one individual's mental decline to endanger our children's safety." The segment made me appear like the antagonist in a cable movie about suburban terror. But while Barbara was busy collecting Emmy nominations for fake tears, I was doing what surveyors do best: following paper trails and connecting evidence. My property insurance got canceled the following morning. The notification claimed substantial change in land utilization, voided my coverage based on aerial photographs showing residential development. Now, Ali, here's something fascinating. I learned helping my neighbor Susan prevent insurance fraud back in 2006. Agents often exploit inside access to trigger cancellations, leaving victims vulnerable right before something unfortunate occurs. Turns out dear Barbara worked part-time for Valley Trust Insurance, the exact company that terminated me. She'd exploited her database access to sabotage my coverage, timing it perfectly with her legal assault. The legal system revealed its corrupt nature when Judge Martin Crawford scheduled an emergency hearing. Crawford golfed with Richard every Tuesday and owned substantial stock in 4 development companies. Conflict of interest wasn't in his vocabulary. My court-appointed attorney appeared smelling like cheap whiskey and mispronounced my name 3 times before recommending I accept reality and compromise. When I demanded a jury trial, they postponed indefinitely, probably hoping I'd die of natural causes first. Barbara convinced Sunrise Ridge families that their property values would collapse if the delusional old man prevailed. She established a legal defense fund and collected $63,000 for attorney expenses. Interesting how that money funded the Hendersons' Mediterranean cruise. Richard's social media photos from Greek island wine tastings were quite educational. The residents organized fundraising events and community sales, unknowingly financing their own exploitation with cult-like enthusiasm. I wasn't remaining idle, though. Every conversation got recorded on my smartphone using an application Daniel installed, with timestamps and GPS coordinates that would withstand federal court scrutiny. Trail cameras went up around my property perimeter, all positioned legally, but capturing every element of their harassment operation. The intimidation escalated rapidly. Dead animals appeared on my porch, opossums mostly, though someone upgraded to a coyote that reeked like week-old roadkill. Nails scattered across my driveway, punctured my truck tires 3 times. Anonymous phone calls promised. Accidents happened to stubborn old fools, always at 2:30 a.m., when the threat felt most genuine. They blocked access to my own mailbox, claiming it occupied Sunrise Ridge easement property. Phoenix security guards threatened arrest if I collected my own correspondence. The irony of mail theft, while accusing me of trespassing, wasn't lost on anyone with basic reasoning skills. That's when my guardian angel arrived, wearing practical clothes and carrying investigation notebooks. Jessica Martinez, investigative journalist for the Sacramento Chronicle, had relocated to rural California, seeking tranquility after big city exhaustion. She approached me after watching Channel 5's Character Assassination, her investigative reporting instincts screaming that something stunk worse than my neglected compost pile. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "I've covered sufficient white-collar crime to recognize a sophisticated con operation. Mind if I review your documentation?" Jessica spent 4 days independently verifying public records, confirming my ownership, and discovering Sunrise Ridge promotional materials dated 3 years before the alleged purchase. Her experience investigating financial fraud taught her that Internet archives never deceive. The Wayback Machine revealed deleted website pages showing development blueprints from 2019, proving criminal premeditation. She uncovered Richard's sealed juvenile record for real estate fraud in Arizona. Our county supervisor had previous experience stealing property, just never attempted grand larceny on this scale. The county escalated to eminent domain threats, claiming Sunrise Ridge provided critical housing for regional growth. They appraised my 612 acres at $95,000 agricultural value, ignoring the $15 million residential potential. Classic government theft. Steal property for pennies, hand it to developer associates for millions. My water well got contaminated overnight. Chickens started showing poisoning symptoms traced to Sunrise Ridge storm drainage runoff. The subdivision violated environmental codes, leaching toxic construction chemicals into groundwater, feeding my well and Whispering Creek. Stress finally caught up with me. Emergency room admission for cardiac symptoms, doctors recommending stress reduction and assisted living facilities. That's when Barbara revealed her true character, visiting with crocodile tears and a $250,000 settlement offer. "Mac," she whispered, leaning over my hospital bed like a predatory bird, "this could all disappear tomorrow. Think about your family. Is dirt really worth dying over?" Lying there with heart monitors beeping, antiseptic smell burning my nostrils, and 4 lines restricting my movement, I realized this transcended property disputes. This was about stopping criminals who'd victimized an entire community while hiding behind suburban respectability. Time to fight back with everything I had. PART2, leaving that hospital bed, felt like emerging from a nightmare into a battlefield. While I'd been playing invalid, Barbara and Richard had been cementing their theft with political maneuvering slick enough to make professional con artists jealous. Richard introduced an emergency county board resolution to incorporate Sunrise Ridge into Willowbrook Springs municipal boundaries, a bureaucratic power play that hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. Municipal jurisdiction would supersede county property regulations, placing the subdivision under city authority, where Richard's influence ran deeper than California earthquake faults. They'd expedited the vote for 12 days out, burying the announcement in legal advertisements where only attorneys and land surveyors bothered looking. Jessica's investigation shifted into high gear, uncovering document forgery that made Watergate look like amateur hour. Digital forensics revealed Richard's operation was duplicating notary certifications, stealing digital signatures from legitimate transactions like a teenager downloading pirated software. The Margaret Blackwell forgery wasn't isolated. They'd been grave-robbing dead notaries' identities across 6 counties, creating a paper trail of fraud that would take federal prosecutors months to untangle. Each forged signature represented another family, victimized by this sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sunrise Ridge families started receiving HOA special assessments that would make loan sharks blush. Barbara demanded thousands per household to fund the legal campaign, threatening foreclosure for none. She was literally extorting the people she'd supposedly protected, charging them exorbitant fees to defend property they didn't legally own. The irony was thicker than Elena's famous cornbread, residents paying to defend their own victimization. Several families contacted me secretly, voices trembling during phone calls made after midnight when their children slept peacefully. They'd begun questioning why their HOA queen needed luxury car payments to fight one old man with measuring equipment. I hired an independent building inspector using Jessica's newspaper budget. Turns out, journalistic integrity sometimes includes funding for exposing corruption. What he discovered made my surveyor's soul weep with professional horror. 52 major code violations, including houses constructed on inadequate foundations over unstable soil without proper geological surveys. The electrical systems violated state fire codes so severely that one spark could transform Sunrise Ridge into a suburban inferno. Water lines were improperly installed, creating cross-contamination risks between sewage and drinking water that could sicken entire families. Barbara's desperation peaked when she attempted bribing Dr. Patricia Nugent to declare me mentally incompetent. $25,000 to falsify dementia diagnosis and recommend guardianship proceedings. The excellent doctor recorded every word, adding witness tampering to the growing list of federal charges. She'd also hired some bottom-feeding private investigator to fabricate stories about my professional history, claims so absurd that any licensed surveyor could debunk them during lunch break. The investigator alleged I'd falsified surveys for profit, lost my professional license twice, and faced fraud allegations in 3 states. Complete fiction. But Barbara was betting residents wouldn't bother verifying. The environmental revelation struck like California wildfire season. Jessica discovered Sunrise Ridge was constructed over federally protected wetlands without EPA permits, violating more environmental regulations than an industrial waste dump. The original geological survey had been falsified by Richard's consulting firm, claiming sensitive marsh ecosystem was insignificant grassland. They'd destroyed rare fairy shrimp breeding habitat, triggering Endangered Species Act violations, carrying $37,500 in daily penalties, enough money to purchase every house in the subdivision 3 times over. Federal environmental law doesn't negotiate or accept political favors, something Barbara and Richard were about to learn the expensive way. Christopher Walsh finally broke his silence after months of threats against his construction crew. The former site supervisor provided copies of the authentic environmental survey, plus photographs of Richard ordering workers to dump concrete over protected wetlands. Christopher had resigned rather than participate in environmental destruction, then endured harassment for maintaining a conscience, apparently a rare commodity in the construction industry these days. Jessica's financial investigation traced Sunrise Ridge funding through more shell corporations than a carnival shell game, connected to offshore accounts that screamed money laundering louder than a fire alarm. The construction loans were secured using my property as collateral without my knowledge, creating fraud so blatant that banking executives would face federal conspiracy charges when this house of cards collapsed. The homeowner's awakening was brutal and swift. Property deeds were worthless paper. Title insurance excluded contested land coverage, and families faced losing homes while still owing mortgages on houses they never legally owned. Secret resident meetings sprouted like mushrooms after rain, discussing class action lawsuits against the people who'd sold them the American dream built on environmental catastrophe. Barbara announced a Sunrise Ridge Community Festival to demonstrate neighborhood support. Her final, desperate gambit for public sympathy. Politicians, law enforcement, and media were invited to witness how normal families were being terrorized by one disturbed neighbor with surveying equipment. She'd scheduled the festival for the same day as the county board incorporation vote, planning to pressure politicians with images of children enjoying bounce houses while the crazy old cartographer tried stealing their homes. But 2 can play the timing game. Jessica coordinated federal EPA inspectors to schedule their wetlands investigation for Festival Day. Christopher agreed to testify about environmental cover-ups and construction fraud. I'd compiled evidence packages showing the full fraud scope, including my father's 1928 mining rights contracts that these amateurs never researched. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose 2 decades of corruption in front of half the county. The sweet aroma of barbecue smoke and carnival popcorn would soon mix with the acrid stench of burning lies. Barbara thought she was orchestrating a public relations victory to cement her theft. Instead, she was about to discover why you never steal from a man who documents every square foot of land in 6 counties. Festival preparation week brought escalating warfare. Jessica's phone call at 5:30 a.m., 4 days before the festival, changed everything dramatically. Mac, get down to the county archives immediately. I found something that's going to detonate this case like dynamite in a fireworks factory. I drove through morning fog, thick as Elena's famous chowder. My heart pounding harder than a teenager's first date. Jessica met me at the county building back entrance, wild-haired and clutching Cofiston documents like she'd discovered buried treasure. "The mining archives?" she gasped, dragging me down creaky wooden stairs into a basement that smelled like mothballs and forgotten bureaucracy. I was researching mineral rights law for another investigation when I stumbled across these beauties. She spread yellowed documents across a table under fluorescent lights that flickered like dying fireflies. Original 1928 mining rights contracts sealed in manila envelopes that hadn't seen daylight since the Kennedy administration. The brittle paper crackled under my fingers like autumn leaves, and suddenly I could hear my father's voice echoing through 9 decades of careful planning. "Your father was a stone-cold genius, Mac. Look at Section 12. My hands trembled, reading the faded typewriter text that would make modern attorneys weep with professional admiration. Malcolm Sterling Sr. hadn't just negotiated mineral rights with Pacific Mining Corporation, he'd secured development protections stronger than Fort Knox vaults. Any unauthorized structures constructed on Sterling property would automatically transfer ownership to the family, along with every improvement, fixture, and decorative element. "Sweet mother of pearl," I whispered, tasting the metallic temps of shock in my mouth. Dad saw this coming a century ago. The contract language was ironclad legal warfare. Unauthorized construction automatically voided competing land claims and transferred all improvements to the rightful owner. Filed with the Federal Mining Commission, it carried jurisdiction that made state property law look like suggestions scribbled on cocktail napkins. No county judge, city council, or HOA president could touch these rights. They were protected by federal mining law older than commercial aviation. Jessica's detective work revealed the smoking gun. My property extended 300 feet beyond current survey markers, encompassing not just 63 houses, but Sunrise, Ridge Clubhouse, Olympic-sized swimming pool, tennis court, and that precious 8-hole golf course where Richard played every weekend. Satellite imagery from 2017 showed boundary markers mysteriously relocated during one of my Colorado visits. Total theft included recreational facilities worth $11 million. Jessica calculated, spreading printouts like a professional card dealer. Under your father's contract, Barbara just handed you a $52 million gift wrapped in suburban stupidity. The beautiful irony made me laugh until tears streamed down my weathered cheeks. 63 houses at $425,000 each, plus amenities, all mine. Thanks to a contract these amateurs never researched properly. The 1928 agreement had no statute of limitations, meaning their fraud actually strengthened my legal position instead of threatening it. Pure, poetic justice served cold with a side of federal law. Jessica had traced Richard's connection to the Mining Historical Society, discovering he'd accessed these exact documents 4 years ago through genealogy research. Email evidence revealed a detailed theft plan, knowing about the easement clause, but gambling I'd never locate the original contracts. He thought he could outsmart a family that's been documenting property rights since Calvin Coolidge was president. Jessica chuckled darkly. But he made one crucial miscalculation. The insurance implications were staggering beyond belief. Sunrise Ridge carried $65 million in fraudulent coverage based on false ownership documents. When this collapsed, insurance companies would face liability exposure bigger than their executive compensation packages. Federal jurisdiction meant local corruption couldn't protect the Hendersons anymore. U.S. Marshals would enforce the 1928 contract with authority that made county sheriffs look like shopping mall security guards. The strategic advantage was overwhelming. I didn't need to prove ownership because Dad's contract automatically granted it. Barbara's festival would become her public execution, and she was about to hand me the rope while cameras rolled. Jessica's kitchen table disappeared under an avalanche of legal documents, property maps, laptop computers, and enough coffee cups to fuel a space shuttle launch. The sweet aroma of her homemade cinnamon rolls battled the acrid smell of printer ink as we plotted the downfall of Sunrise Ridge's suburban empire. Elena would have loved this organized chaos with righteous purpose. Leonard Webb arrived, looking like federal justice in a tailored suit. This silver-haired prosecutor had spent 42 years sending white-collar criminals to prison, and his wire-rimmed glasses had witnessed more courtroom victories than a championship racehorse. He reviewed our evidence with surgical precision, occasionally nodding or making notes in perfect legal shorthand. "Your father's 1928 contract is tighter than bark on an oak tree," Leonard said, spreading the yellowed documents like winning poker cards. "I've prosecuted 15 mining rights cases. This language is so bulletproof it could stop a freight train." Dr. Patricia Chun joined via video conference, her EPA credentials adding environmental felonies to our growing prosecution list. The wetlands damage assessment made my surveyor soul weep bitter tears. $18 million to restore habitat that had taken millennia to develop naturally. Centuries of ecological development destroyed for suburban sprawl. "The fairy shrimp species they destroyed is federally protected," Dr. Chun explained, her voice carrying congressional testimony. "Daily fines compound faster than credit card interest. We're talking generational bankruptcy." Christopher Walsh arrived looking like a man who'd been carrying concrete guilt for months. The former site supervisor spread blueprints across Jessica's table, revealing engineering disasters that would make any builder's insurance agent faint. "These houses are disasters, waiting to happen," Christopher said, his calloused finger tracing foundation plans. Richard ordered substandard materials instead of proper engineering to maximize profit margins. "Families are living in expensive houses that don't know they're collapsing." Yet, the gallows humor wasn't lost on anyone. Sunrise Ridge residents were literally living above their problems, blissfully unaware of the catastrophe lurking beneath. Patricia Goldman, our forensic accountant, connected financial dots with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered buried treasure in spreadsheet files. Her laptop displayed money trails that looked like spaghetti art created by intoxicated toddlers. "Total fraud exceeds $112 million, Patricia announced, each number landing like artillery shells. They pre-sold 190 lots using fake ownership documents. Bernie Madoff would be impressed by this Ponzi scheme's ambition. Jessica orchestrated media, strategist with military precision, marking our whiteboard timeline like invasion plans. EPA inspection at 10 during opening ceremonies. Federal marshals at noon during face painting. My story goes live at 1 when families check phones over lunch. The coordination impressed even my surveyor's love of detailed planning. EPA handled environmental crimes. FBI covered financial fraud. U.S. Marshals would serve papers that local corruption couldn't touch. Like watching a precision timepiece designed by angry federal agents. My biggest concern remained protecting innocent families caught in Barbara's web. Leonard had researched victim compensation programs while I developed fair rent-to-own agreements for residents who wanted staying. These people bought the American dream from professional liars, I insisted, tasting the metallic determination that meant no compromise on principles. We'll expose the criminals without destroying the casualties. Technology deployment turned Jessica's journalism team into a documentary crew. Discrete recording equipment, live streaming capability, and evidence collection systems would capture every moment for federal prosecution and social media transparency. The decoy operation required acting skills I didn't know this old surveyor possessed. I'd pretend to negotiate with Barbara during the festival, keeping the Hendersons distracted while federal agents positioned like chess pieces around Sunrise Ridge. Father Michael Torres provided moral authority that small-town corruption couldn't dismiss. Saying a Catholic Church would shelter displaced residents, while his historical knowledge about the Sterling family's century-long community presence gave weight to our cause. Professional exhibits prepared for media would tell the story without words. Before and after photographs of wetlands destruction, side-by-side forgery comparisons, and water contamination evidence would make evening news editors weep with journalistic joy. Backup plans covered every nightmare scenario from local interference to flight risks. Evidence lived in multiple secure locations. Civil rights attorneys stood ready for retaliation attempts. 3 national news networks had reporters warming up for potential coverage. The evening before Festival Day, I visited Elena's grave as sunset painted the sky colors she'd loved, soft purples and golds that reminded me why this land mattered beyond money or property rights. Her journal entry from our 25th anniversary echoed in memory. Mac fights for what's right, not what's easy. Kneeling beside her headstone, breathing the sweet scent of jasmine that grew wild around her resting place, I made a solemn promise. Tamora would expose 2 decades of corruption while protecting families who'd been victimized by their own dreams. Barbara had planned a festival to celebrate her theft. Instead, she was about to host the most expensive public confession in California history, served with a side of federal justice and broadcast live for anyone with internet access. The irony tasted sweeter than Jessica's cinnamon rolls. Festival Day was coming, and justice was about to be served cold. Part 3 festival morning arrived with the kind of picture-perfect weather that made Barbara believe divine providence endorsed her suburban theft. Sunrise Ridge sparkled like a Hollywood movie set, decorated with enough balloons and streamers to make theme parks jealous. The smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy, mixed with fresh-cut grass, created an atmosphere of wholesome family entertainment that would have been heartwarming if it wasn't constructed on decades of fraud. Barbara had deployed every manipulation technique in the suburban playbook. Children's dance troupes performed at the opening ceremony. Local politicians delivered speeches about protecting family values. Media cameras focused on sympathetic families, while carefully avoiding the federal agents positioned discreetly around festival grounds like well-dressed predators. The night before, someone had severed my internet and telephone lines. Amateur hour. Intimidation that made me laugh harder than a comedy marathon. My truck tires got slashed again, and a threatening message appeared on my windshield, promising accidents happen to stubborn old coots. Jessica's vehicle got vandalized, with spray paint reading fake news in letters that looked like a kindergartner's first rebellion attempt. The desperation was palpable, hanging in the morning air like fog that refused to lift. Richard had scheduled an emergency county board meeting for Saturday morning, pushing the Sunrise Ridge Incorporation vote with the desperation of a used car salesman on the final day of the month. 4 board members received anonymous $15,000 donations the day before. Jessica's cameras caught the cash exchanges in parking lots like some low-budget spy thriller. My bank accounts got frozen Friday afternoon, supposedly due to suspicious activity and money laundering investigation. The bank manager, Richard's college roommate, refused to explain specifics beyond bureaucratic double-talk that would make a tax attorney proud. Suddenly, I couldn't access funds for legal fees or groceries. Financial warfare, designed to force surrender through economic starvation. Barbara cranked up the family manipulation, telling residents I planned to bulldoze houses immediately after winning, leaving children homeless before school started. She created fake social media profiles, spreading rumors about my mental health with the dedication of a teenage cyberbully who'd discovered anonymous accounts. Sunrise Ridge parents organized protective patrols around the subdivision like their children faced invasion from one old man with surveying equipment. The absurdity would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. Construction evidence, destruction began overnight. Crews arrived with truckloads of clean topsoil to cover contaminated areas, attempting to hide environmental violations before EPA inspection. Christopher documented the cover-up with hidden cameras, capturing federal obstruction of justice that carried 7-year prison sentences. Richard contacted state environmental officials, claiming Jessica's investigation was fake news, arranging for a friendly local television station to interview concerned residents about media harassment. Social media bots flooded Sunrise Ridge posts with supportive comments that read like they were written by the same person using a thesaurus. Barbara hired San Francisco's most aggressive law firm, filing a $65 million defamation lawsuit against Jessica and her newspaper. They demanded retraction of all fraud stories and attempted obtaining injunctions blocking Festival Day coverage, basically trying to win through legal intimidation what they couldn't accomplish through actual innocence. Someone tipped off EPA inspectors about security threats at the festival, filing anonymous complaints about federal overreach and bureaucratic harassment of working families. Richard's political connections pressured EPA to delay investigation, playing jurisdictional games that would make constitutional lawyers weep with frustration. The community split down the middle, like a poorly designed subdivision. Longtime residents chose sides based on decades-old grudges. Local businesses faced boycott threats for supporting either party. The Chamber of Commerce divided faster than divorce proceedings over holiday plans. Private security increased around Sunrise Ridge, with guards following Jessica while she worked. Unmarked vehicles parked outside my property overnight, and harassment campaigns that included construction noise starting at 5:30 every morning. The smell of diesel exhaust and dust became constant reminders that Barbara would destroy peaceful countryside to protect her theft. Christopher Walsh received death threats, complete with family photographs marked with red X's, witness intimidation that crossed federal lines into terrorism territory. His employer got pressured to terminate him for unreliable behavior, forcing FBI to place Christopher in witness protection until trial. Barbara's desperation reached pathetic levels when she contacted my adult children in Boston, Denver, and Seattle, claiming their father was having a mental breakdown and suggesting guardianship proceedings to protect his assets. She implied, "I was dishonoring Elena's memory by fighting for family land," psychological manipulation that would make cult leaders take extensive notes. The insurance scam exposure came when Jessica discovered Sunrise Ridge policies were printed on stolen letterhead from legitimate companies. Residents' homeowner insurance would be denied because the policies never actually existed, leaving families facing financial disaster without coverage for anything. Richard filed emergency motions to halt federal investigation, court shopping for friendly judges, and claiming agencies lacked jurisdiction over local property disputes. He submitted dozens of procedural motions designed to delay and confuse, procedural warfare that made tax code look like children's picture books. Festival Day crystallized into the final battleground, where truth would face suburban lies under bright California sunshine. Media crews arrived like cavalry reinforcements, federal agents positioned discreetly throughout the grounds. Community tension reached breaking point that felt like holding lit dynamite. The sweet smell of funnel cakes and innocent laughter of children would soon mix with the bitter taste of exposed corruption and federal justice-served ice. Festival morning broke with oppressive heat that makes Northern California summers legendary and tempers shorter than roadside firecrackers. Sunrise Ridge looked like Norman Rockwell's fever dream come to life. Red, white, and blue bunting draped over stolen land. Children's laughter echoing across wetlands that had been murdered for suburban sprawl. Barbara orchestrated her final performance at the festival gazebo, staging a public settlement meeting with all the subtlety of a Broadway musical production. She'd brought microphones, speakers, and an oversized cardboard check for $375,000, playing 2 cameras like she was accepting an Academy Award for Best Supporting Victim in a Drama. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the gathering crowd, dabbing her eyes with tissues that looked suspiciously dry, "I'm here to demonstrate how reasonable people can resolve conflicts without destroying families and communities." The oversized check fluttered in the morning breeze like a surrender flag made of lies and desperation. "I played my part in this theatrical farce, pretending to consider her offer, while federal agents positioned around the festival like pieces on a three-dimensional chessboard. The smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy couldn't mask the metallic taste of justice approaching, faster than a summer thunderstorm rolling off the Pacific. Dr. Patricia Chun arrived discreetly during the children's magic show, carrying EPA testing equipment disguised in a family picnic basket that would make spy agencies jealous. She began soil and water sampling around the festival area, discovering fresh concrete poured over wetlands overnight, evidence tampering that added federal obstruction charges to the exponentially growing list. Jessica's financial investigation had uncovered the international money laundering connection that morning. Sunrise Ridge was funded through Chinese shell corporations connected to a real estate fraud network operating in 17 states. Richard Henderson wasn't just a small-town crook. He was connected to an international criminal enterprise that made local corruption look like shoplifting candy bars from convenience stores. The scope was staggering, involving wire fraud across international borders, money laundering through cryptocurrency, and connections to organized crime that would take federal prosecutors years to fully untangle. Carmen Rodriguez, the elementary school teacher who lived in Sunrise Ridge with her 3 young daughters, approached Jessica during the face-painting activity. Her hands trembled as she showed forged notary signatures on her deed, recognizing Richard's distinctive handwriting from his campaign flyers and community newsletters. "I trusted them," Carmen whispered, glancing nervously at her children getting butterfly designs painted on their innocent cheeks. "They said we were buying our forever home, but everything was elaborate lies." Her courage would become the crack that shattered Barbara's facade of community protection. One voice of truth cutting through layers of deception. The media ambush came during the lunch hour when Richard arranged a surprise television interview to attack my credibility on camera. Channel 5's cameras rolled as he portrayed me as a confused elderly man endangering innocent families with delusions about property ownership that threatened children's safety and community stability. The interview was spectacularly interrupted by federal marshals serving arrest warrants live on television. Richard's face transformed from smug confidence to absolute panic faster than a teenager caught shoplifting as handcuffs clicked around his wrists during the live broadcast. His protests about deep state conspiracies and government overreach played perfectly for evening news soundbites that would be replayed for weeks. Barbara's meltdown began when she realized Richard's arrest exposed their entire conspiracy to the world. Standing beside the bounce house, where toddlers played innocent games, she started screaming at federal agents about constitutional rights and government persecution with the intensity of someone watching their entire world collapse. Her accusations that EPA was part of a liberal conspiracy against honest Americans got recorded by dozens of phones, creating viral social media content that destroyed any remaining credibility she might have possessed. Jessica's newspaper released the complete evidence package online while families ate barbecue and checked their phones during lunch break. Interactive timelines showed 5 years of fraud conspiracy. Financial records proved international money laundering. Document comparisons revealed systematic forgery across multiple counties. The internet moved faster than small-town gossip, spreading truth that couldn't be contained by local corruption or intimidation tactics. Father Michael Torres organized an emergency resident meeting at St. Catherine's Catholic Church, providing sanctuary for displaced families, while legal aid volunteers offered free consultation. Local businesses stepped up with job offers for residents facing financial crises, proving that genuine community spirit could survive suburban cancer. EPA testing revealed groundwater contamination affecting the entire watershed, forcing immediate evacuation of Sunrise Ridge families to local hotels at federal government expense. The water supply was declared unsafe for human consumption, and cleanup estimates reached $32 million for environmental restoration that could take decades to complete properly. U.S. Marshals secured Sunrise Ridge as a federal crime scene, giving residents 48 hours to remove personal belongings before evidence collection began. The subdivision that had represented stolen American dreams became a monument to the consequences of greed disguised as community development. The corruption web unraveled faster than cheap yarn pulled by playful kittens. County Sheriff's Deputy Thomas Henderson got arrested for accepting bribes and evidence tampering. 4 county board members faced federal charges for money laundering and conspiracy. The bank president was indicted for mortgage fraud and racketeering. FBI opened investigations into all Henderson business dealings, discovering systematic theft spanning 3 decades across multiple states and international borders. Barbara's desperate flight attempt came as federal agents tightened the noose around her elaborate criminal enterprise. Airport security caught her at San Francisco International with suitcases containing $3.7 million in bearer bonds, claiming the money was retirement savings despite no legitimate income source that could justify such wealth. The bonds traced to Cayman Islands accounts connected to the Chinese money laundering network that financed Sunrise Ridge and dozens of similar fraudulent developments. National media trucks arrived as the story gained unstoppable momentum, transforming a small-town festival into a circus of justice that would make constitutional law professors assign case studies for years to come. Social media hashtags trending nationally proved that authentic David versus Goliath stories still captured American hearts and imagination. The stage was set for public confrontation that would expose decades of corruption while cameras rolled and the entire nation watched justice being served in real time. The festival gazebo transformed into an impromptu courthouse as federal agents, media crews, and half the county gathered for a showdown that would make Wild West historians jealous of the drama. The sweet smell of funnel cakes mixed with the acrid tension of exposed corruption, while children's laughter provided an innocent soundtrack to the collapse of Sunrise Ridge's criminal empire built on lies and stolen land. I stepped to the microphone, wearing my father's surveyor compass around my neck like a sacred talisman, holding the original 1928 mining rights document that would change everything for everyone involved. My voice carried across the crowd without amplification. 40 years of calling property boundaries had taught me how to project authority that demanded attention and respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking directly at Barbara, who stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. "I'm here to set the record straight about my family's land and the criminals who thought they could steal it with impunity." The crowd fell silent, except for the distant hum of federal agents' radios and the flutter of evidence papers in the California breeze that smelled like justice. I read key passages from my father's contract aloud, explaining how the 1928 mining rights automatically transferred ownership of any unauthorized construction to the Sterling family, along with every improvement, fixture, and decorative element installed. "Every house, every streetlight, every blade of grass in Sunrise Ridge belongs to me, under federal law," I announced, holding up the yellowed document like Moses presenting sacred commandments. My father was intelligent enough to protect our family from exactly this kind of theft nearly a century ago. Barbara pushed through, the crowd like a woman possessed, grabbing the microphone with the desperation of someone watching their empire crumble in real time before their eyes. "This is all lies and fake documents," she screamed, her carefully maintained suburban composure finally cracking like cheap veneer under pressure. "These people are part of a conspiracy against working families and the American dream." Tatisa Weno. Attorney Leonard Webb stepped forward with arrest warrants, his federal authority cutting through local corruption like a hot knife through butter. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he read charges against Victoria Barbara Henderson, 53 counts, including fraud, money laundering, environmental crimes, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit theft. "You have the right to remain silent," Leonard said, as federal marshals placed handcuffs on Barbara's wrists. Her perfectly manicured hands looked almost fragile in the metal restraints, a fitting symbol of how delicate her criminal enterprise had always been beneath the suburban respectability. Sunrise Ridge residents reacted with confusion and anger that split the crowd faster than a lightning strike during a summer thunderstorm. Carmen Rodriguez stepped forward to speak for families who'd been victimized by their own American dream. "We just wanted homes for our children," she said, her voice trembling with emotion and betrayal. "We didn't know about any fraud. We trusted these people with our life savings and our futures. Some residents turned their anger toward Barbara, finally understanding how thoroughly they'd been manipulated and exploited, while others defended her out of desperate hope that their property investments weren't completely worthless. The community division was painful to witness. Good people torn apart by criminals who'd hidden behind suburban respectability and exploited basic human dreams of homeownership. I took the microphone back, addressing the confused families with the compassion Elena had taught me through decades of marriage. You folks are victims too. This isn't your fault in any way. We'll work together to make this right. I'm offering fair rent-to-own agreements for anyone who wants to stay while we sort out the legal complications. The promise hung in the air like hope returning after darkness. Part 4, Dr. Patricia Chun chose that precise moment to drop the environmental bombshell that silenced even the most defensive residents. Standing beside the gazebo with EPA credentials displayed prominently, she presented soil contamination findings that made everyone's blood run cold. The subdivision was constructed over toxic waste from an abandoned chemical plant, Dr. Chun announced, her EPA authority brooking absolutely no argument. Groundwater contamination extends far beyond Sunrise Ridge boundaries. All residents must evacuate immediately for health and safety concerns. She displayed charts showing dangerous chemical levels in soil and water samples, lead concentrations exceeding federal limits by 300%, arsenic levels that posed serious cancer risks, especially to developing children, volatile organic compounds that could cause neurological damage with prolonged exposure. The water supply is contaminated with industrial pollutants, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of federal environmental law. The soil contains chemicals that pose serious health risks, particularly to children and pregnant women. This is not a precaution. This is a public health emergency. The media feeding frenzy exploded like fireworks on Independence Day. Reporters fired questions faster than an auctioneer's chant, creating a cacophony of competing voices demanding answers. How did county officials miss such obvious fraud? What's the total financial damage to victims? Will this lead to federal oversight of rural development nationwide? Is criminal prosecution guaranteed? The story was rapidly becoming a national symbol of small-town corruption and environmental destruction that captivated audiences across America. County Sheriff Deputy Thomas Henderson arrived with backup officers attempting to assert local authority over federal agents in a jurisdictional contest that would have been amusing if it wasn't so pathetic. He discovered he was also under investigation for accepting bribes when federal marshals handed him his own arrest warrant with a side of professional humiliation. Jessica stepped forward to provide context for the gathered media, explaining how her investigation had uncovered a conspiracy spanning 5 years in multiple states with international connections. She credited Christopher Walsh's courage in exposing construction fraud and environmental cover-ups that endangered public health for generations. Without whistleblowers willing to risk everything, Jessica said into multiple microphones, this fraud would have continued victimizing families indefinitely. The dramatic moment came when I pulled out my surveyor's measuring tape and walked to the property boundary, demonstrating exactly where Sunrise Ridge sat on Sterling land, with mathematical precision that couldn't be disputed. This tape measure doesn't lie, unlike some people, I said, looking directly at Barbara, who was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle with handcuffs gleaming in the afternoon sun. From this point forward, truth and justice will prevail. From the back of the police vehicle, Barbara screamed her final outburst that revealed her true character beneath the suburban mask. These people don't deserve nice homes anyway. The racial slurs that followed, directed at Hispanic families in the crowd, confirmed the discriminatory motives Jessica had suspected all along. Her mask had finally shattered completely. Festival Day had become a public execution of corruption. BROADCAST, live across social media platforms and picked up by national news networks hungry for compelling human drama. Justice served cold with a side of environmental protection, all witnessed by half of Northern California and millions watching online. The legal aftermath unfolded with federal efficiency that would make Elena smile from heaven, knowing justice had prevailed against overwhelming odds. 6 months later, Sunrise Ridge stood like a suburban ghost town, a monument to greed and corruption. Yellow EPA tape fluttered in the California breeze where manicured lawns once spread their artificial perfection. The sweet scent of wildflowers had returned, mixing with morning dew and the earthy smell of healthy soil, as nature reclaimed stolen land with remarkable speed. My heritage apple trees were replanted where cookie-cutter McMansions once squatted like architectural tumors, proving that good land always outlasts bad ideas and corrupt schemes. Barbara Henderson received 18 years in federal prison. Apparently, orange jumpsuits don't come with HOA, president badges, or the authority she'd wielded so ruthlessly. Richard received 23 years for racketeering and international money laundering, his political career ending in spectacular disgrace. Sheriff Deputy Thomas Henderson and 4 county board members earned 6-year sentences courtesy of the federal penitentiary system. New oversight requirements mean future property thieves will need significantly better lawyers and much bigger bribes to avoid detection. The Hendersons' assets were seized completely, including their mansion, luxury vehicles, vacation properties, and offshore accounts. Federal prosecutors recovered $47 million in fraudulent gains, distributing funds to victims through a court-supervised restitution program. Barbara's Mercedes SUV was auctioned off, with proceeds funding environmental restoration projects. 27 Sunrise Ridge families accepted my rent-to-own offers, building sustainable homes on properly zoned land that respected environmental regulations and actual property rights. Carmen Rodriguez became our community liaison, coordinating between displaced families and support services. Her children now play in clean streams where toxic runoff once flowed freely, catching endangered fairy shrimp in restored wetlands. Watching kids discover nature and healthy ecosystems reminded me why we fought so hard against suburban corruption. Their laughter echoed across valleys that had nearly been destroyed forever by greed, masquerading as community development. The Sterling Foundation launched with $28 million from the property windfall, funding scholarships for first-generation college students who understand that honest work beats suburban scheming every single time. We've awarded 137 scholarships in 3 years, helping students from working families access education without crushing debt that limits their futures. The Elena Sterling Memorial Library anchors Willowbrook Springs, offering free legal aid clinics that help property owners protect themselves from corporate predators with tablets and fake smiles. The library hosted 218 consultations last year alone, preventing numerous potential frauds before they could victimize families. 500 acres became the Sterling Wildlife Sanctuary, protecting endangered fairy shrimp and wetlands that educate future generations about environmental stewardship and the consequences of ignoring ecological protection. The Climate Research Station attracts scientists from 7 universities, proving conservation and education create more sustainable jobs than fraudulent development ever could possibly generate. Jessica's Pulitzer Prize launched her Washington Post career covering white-collar crime and environmental justice, but she returns annually for our Sterling Heritage Festival. Her Emmy-winning documentary about Sunrise Ridge became required viewing in journalism schools nationwide, teaching students that good reporting can literally save communities from destruction and exploitation. The documentary has been screened at film festivals worldwide, inspiring investigative journalists in 12 countries to expose similar fraud schemes in their communities. Jessica receives emails weekly from families who avoided scams after watching her documentary and recognizing warning signs. Christopher Walsh testified before Congress about construction, corruption, and environmental fraud, strengthening whistleblower protections that now bear his name in federal legislation. The Walsh Whistleblower Protection Act provides financial support and legal protection for construction workers who report environmental violations and safety hazards. His environmental restoration company employs other workers who chose conscience over corporate pressure and profit margins. Turns out honesty pays significantly better than fraud with substantially less risk of federal prosecution. Christopher's company has remediated contaminated sites across 8 states, employing 47 people who share his commitment to environmental protection. The national impact exceeded our wildest expectations and inspired similar investigations nationwide. FBI investigations uncovered similar schemes in 62 communities across 17 states, shutting down $3.8 billion in fraudulent developments. Hundreds of families avoided losing their life savings because our case exposed the tactics these criminals used systematically. Congressional task forces created federal property verification requirements that protect families from professional thieves masquerading as community developers selling American dreams built on lies. The Sterling Act requires enhanced due diligence for large property transactions, making fraud significantly more difficult to execute successfully. I teach surveying at the community college now, sharing 40 years of experience with students who will protect the next generation from boundary disputes and property fraud. My classes are always fully enrolled, with students eager to learn the technical skills and ethical principles that prevented my family's land from being stolen permanently. My key lesson remains constant: accurate measurements and honest documentation built America. Everything else is just expensive decoration covering corrupt foundations. I emphasize to students that surveyors serve as guardians of property rights, protecting both individual families and entire communities from fraud. Our annual Heritage Festival celebrates authentic local history with crafts, music, and storytelling that honor genuine community values rather than suburban fantasies. Former enemies collaborate on planning committees, proving shared purpose, heal divisions created by greed faster than any therapy session could accomplish. Last year's festival attracted 5,000 visitors, raising money for local charities and educational programs. Environmental recovery exceeded our wildest hopes, beyond any reasonable expectations. Endangered species returned to restored wetlands with remarkable speed. Educational boardwalks allow school groups to study ecosystem recovery in real time. Research data helps farmers adapt to climate change while protecting sensitive habitats that support biodiversity. The crisp morning mist over healthy wetlands beats suburban chlorine and artificial landscaping any day of the week. Scientists have documented 12 species returning to the sanctuary that were thought locally extinct, proving nature's resilience when given opportunity to recover. Personal healing came like California sunrise. Gradually, then suddenly painting everything in colors Elena loved throughout our marriage. I visit her grave each evening at sunset, reporting community progress and scholarship recipients who benefit from our stand against corruption and environmental destruction. Her journal's final entry still guides my decisions. Mac fights for what's right, not what's easy. Those words are now engraved on the Memorial Library entrance, inspiring everyone who enters seeking knowledge or justice. Here's what this entire ordeal taught me about justice, community, and standing up against corruption when it seems overwhelming. Standing up for what's right often means standing alone initially, but honest documentation and principled allies attract good people to your cause like moths to flame. My father understood that land represents responsibility to future generations who deserve better than environmental destruction disguised as progress and community development. Property rights matter fundamentally because they protect families from predators who exploit the American dream for personal profit without regard for consequences. When someone tries to steal your land, they're stealing your family's history and your children's future, not just dirt and trees. The lesson extends beyond property disputes. Corporate criminals hide behind respectability, exploiting trust and dreams to victimize entire communities. They rely on victims feeling powerless and isolated, too overwhelmed to fight back against seemingly unlimited resources. But documentation defeats deception. Federal law protects citizens when local corruption prevails. And truth always surfaces eventually, especially when brave journalists and whistleblowers refuse to remain silent despite personal risks. Jessica's investigation proved that one determined reporter with integrity can expose fraud that affects thousands. Christopher's courage showed that whistleblowers are heroes who deserve protection, not punishment. Carmen's voice demonstrated that victims speaking truth can shatter elaborate The environmental dimension revealed how corporate greed destroys natural resources that took millennia to develop, all for short-term profit that benefits a few at the expense of many. Protecting wetlands, endangered species, and clean water isn't radical environmentalism. It's basic stewardship responsibility to future generations who will inherit our decisions. The criminal justice system works when allowed to function properly, despite local corruption and political interference. Federal jurisdiction exists specifically to prevent the kind of local corruption that protected the Hendersons for years. EPA authority protects public health when economic interests try silencing environmental concerns. Community resilience emerged as the most inspiring lesson. Despite manipulation and division, good people united around truth and justice once the facts became undeniable. Local businesses supported displaced families, churches provided sanctuary and assistance. Neighbors helped neighbors recover from betrayal. The Sterling Foundation ensures this lesson reaches beyond our small community. Scholarships help students from working families access education without crushing debt. Legal aid clinics empower property owners to defend their rights. Environmental education teaches children to value and protect natural resources. Have you battled HOA nightmares or property disputes that seemed impossible to win? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might provide the courage another family needs to fight back against professional thieves hiding behind community development and suburban respectability. Together, we can expose fraud before it destroys more families and communities. Your voice matters more than you realize in the fight against corruption. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption through persistence, documentation, and refusing to surrender when justice demands action. Your support helps us investigate small-town fraud nationwide, proving that justice prevails when honest folks unite against suburban schemes and environmental destruction. The Sterling case became a landmark precedent, cited in property law textbooks and environmental litigation nationwide. Law schools teach it as an example of how century-old contracts can protect modern property rights. Environmental programs use it to demonstrate the long-term consequences of ignoring ecological regulations. Federal agencies reformed oversight procedures based on lessons learned from Sunrise Ridge. County clerks now face mandatory verification. Requirements for property transfers. Notary certifications require biometric authentication that prevents forgery. Title insurance companies implemented stricter due diligence protocols. The ripple effects continue expanding years after that fateful festival day. Families victimized by similar schemes contacted us for advice and support. Journalists investigating fraud in their communities sought Jessica's guidance. Whistleblowers facing retaliation found encouragement in Christopher's example. Barbara and Richard's criminal network unraveled completely, leading to 73 additional indictments across 9 states. The international money laundering conspiracy involved organized crime figures, corrupt politicians, and corporate executives who thought themselves untouchable. Federal prosecutors recovered nearly $2 billion in fraudulent assets, returning money to victims who'd lost life savings to sophisticated cons. The criminal enterprise's destruction sent shockwaves through real estate fraud operations nationwide, forcing criminals to reconsider their tactics. For me, personally, justice brought closure that allowed moving forward while honoring Elena's memory and my father's legacy. The Sterling Foundation ensures their values continue benefiting future generations. The Wildlife Sanctuary preserves land they loved for scientific research and public education. Every scholarship recipient writes me letters describing how education transformed their opportunities. Every family buying homes through fair rent-to-own agreements thanks us for providing second chances. Every student touring restored wetlands leaves understanding environmental stewardship importance. Standing at the property boundary where apple trees now flourish, breathing clean mountain air and hearing bird songs Elena loved, I'm reminded why this fight mattered beyond money or property ownership. We protected not just land, but principles. Not just one family's heritage, but entire community's future. Not just present justice, but future generations' inheritance. Barbara thought she could steal land through fraudulent paperwork and suburban manipulation. Instead, she handed us the tools to dismantle a criminal empire and create lasting positive change from the ashes of her corruption. The sweetest irony, her desperate attempt to silence one stubborn old surveyor inspired a movement that's protecting thousands of families nationwide from similar schemes. Thanks for following this journey through corruption, justice, and redemption. If this story resonated with you, please share it widely. The more people understand these schemes, the harder they become to execute successfully. Remember, accurate documentation defeats deception. Federal law protects citizens. Truth always surfaces. And standing up for what's right, though difficult and often lonely, ultimately prevails when good people refuse to surrender. Now go check your property boundaries. Verify your documents. Support local journalism. Protect whistleblowers. And never let anyone tell you that fighting corruption is impossible. Elena would be proud. My father would be satisfied. And I sleep peacefully knowing we made the world slightly better for future generations who will never know how close they came to inheriting poisoned land and broken dreams. Justice served. Lessons learned. Legacy secured. The end of one story, but the beginning of countless others. As truth spreads and corruption faces consequences,